Hello everyone, I hope you're all having a great day today, and in this video we're going to be doing a review for The Dark Knight Rises, which came out in 2012. This was the final installment to the Dark Knight trilogy that was directed by Christopher Nolan. Now when it comes to this movie, the performances are all great. The score for this film, similar to the previous two films in the trilogy, is phenomenal. And the film itself tries to be very epic, it's very ambitious, but the story overall might be a little bit questionable, so we'll need to dive into some more specifics. So this is following up The Dark Knight, which was a very well received film, one of the greatest comic book films of all time, and that film kind of ended with them trying to cover up what Harvey Dent did, essentially with Batman kind of losing the trust of the citizens of Gotham, as well as the Gotham Police Department. So you would think it'd be setting up that he's going to be more of a vigilante, but instead he just retires completely, and this was only after 1 year of crime fighting, and so he's retired from The Dark Knight to The Dark Knight Rises a total of 8 years, and he doesn't become Batman again until new threats start to arise. While I do think this is a great version of Batman, my one criticism is the fact that he retired so early for so long. Batman as a character has changed in various forms of media throughout the years, but at no point until this trilogy would he have ever done something like that. But anyways, for the villains in this movie, they couldn't bring back Two-Face obviously because he was killed off at the end of The Dark Knight, and due to the unfortunate death of Heath Ledger, they obviously weren't going to bring back the Joker. They had kind of considered making a reference to him at some point in this movie, but they just ended up not wanting to do that at all, and I respect that. Now, the Scarecrow had been in the previous two films of this trilogy, and he does appear in this movie for a little bit, but I wish he had a bigger role in the story since he was the only villain that was in all of these movies. But the main villain of this movie is Bane, played by Tom Hardy, and a lot of people really love this version of Bane, and I would definitely say it's better than the 1997 version. But just overall, I kind of have mixed feelings about him as a villain in this movie. They try to be really realistic with him, so he's not as big and muscular as the cartoonish depictions of him, and he doesn't have the venom or anything like that. But despite the fact that they tried to make him seem really realistic, I feel like his whole scheme is a little bit too cartoonish, where at the beginning of the movie, he's like cutting that plane in half, and just his plan throughout the movie to take over Gotham with all the bombs and that kind of stuff feels a little bit weird. It doesn't seem to make the most sense. It's also a little hard to understand what he says some of the time. He kind of has a goofy voice, but at least they understood that Bane is a complex character and he's more than just muscle, he's also pretty intelligent. You also had Selina Kyle in this movie, aka Catwoman, and while I don't think this version of Catwoman is as memorable as some of her other appearances on the big screen, this is still a really good version, and she's also really more of a vigilante than a villain in this movie, and it was definitely the right direction to go to story-wise with her and Batman falling in love. There's some great side characters in this movie, obviously Commissioner Gordon, played by Gary Oldman, Lucius Fox, played by Morgan Freeman, and Alfred, played by Michael Caine. These characters were in all three of the films in this trilogy, and they were just as good in this movie as the previous two movies. Now, I will say Gotham City does look a little bit generic in this movie. The previous two movies had kind of used like smoke to kind of add to the atmosphere, and they don't really do that in this movie much. And this movie also does feel really slow paced compared to the other movies in the trilogy. It takes a while for Bruce Wayne to finally become Batman once again, and there are some good sequences, especially the fight with Bane where Bane ends up snapping his back, but that leads to a very long stretch of the movie where you have to wait a very long time for Batman to reappear because his back needs to heal, and I just think that part of the plot is kind of dumb because Bane's plan took so long it allowed Batman's back to heal, so it obviously went on for months. So I just feel like there's some conveniences in the plot like that just feel a little bit lazy, but once you get to the final battle, it's pretty good. And normally you wouldn't see Batman in his suit fighting in the middle of the day, but it's supposed to be like this point where it's all or nothing. He's trying to be the hero of Gotham City, and I do think the film does a good job of connecting to Batman Begins with Liam Neeson reappearing as Ra's al Ghul in these kind of flashbacks, and his daughter Talia al Ghul is also in this movie in like this twist reveal that she was kind of the mastermind, and I just think the execution of that was not that great, and to say her death scene is terrible would be the understatement of the century. Just the acting and the way it was shot, it just feels so awkward. And then of course you have Batman being the hero and actually faking his death to retire for good. If there's one thing this version of Batman likes to do, it's retire. Although some people have actually interpreted the final scene as Alfred was just imagining that Bruce Wayne was still alive and he did actually die. I guess that is open to interpretation. But let's just say he retired. They did make the right decision with him and Selena Kyle being together. But at the end of the day, I just don't think him retiring was the best way to go with the story. And they do have Robin continuing his legacy. This version of Robin is a cop named John Blake, although it's revealed at the end of the movie that his legal first name is Robin. And it's not like he's a terrible character, but I don't know why they thought it was the right direction to go. When you have multiple different people from the comics you can pull storylines from, they could have had Dick Grayson, Jason Todd, Tim Drake, or Damian Wayne, and they just made up a completely new character. I will say the ending monologue is actually really good, but just as a movie in general, I would say this is a pretty good movie overall, very solid, but as a Batman movie, it's questionable to say the least. This just feels so much more like Christopher Nolan's interpretation of Batman than the best possible adaptation of Batman you could have. Earlier on in the trilogy, it felt more like plot points were being inspired by the comics, whereas in this movie they just went a very weird direction with all these different characters, and even then the execution for what they were going for isn't quite on spot. There's just a lot of conveniences and I'm sure some plot holes as well. So overall, on the quality scale of 0 to 100, we'll give it a 71%, and I would definitely recommend it if you're a fan of Batman or superhero movies in general. And there have been vague talks about there being a sequel for this film, I guess where Batman would unretire again, and I'm all for that if they end up doing something like that. But as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.